Alrighty. Welcome everybody to episode 87 of the Racing Line Pod. I just joined with Joey again tonight. Anthony's still MIA, missing in action. But Joey, not a lot of racing going on lately, mate, but how are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Not a lot if you're looking at what we're usually watching,
Hmm.
but when we broaden our horizons, there's been a few interesting happenings over the last weekend. Some stuff that um, I was cautiously optimistic with and interested in just seeing how our two Aussie boys did in the States this weekend.
We
And I
we
think
claiming SVG like we claim Russell Crowe. Is that what we're doing?
we're not claiming him because he is a Kiwi, and I would never pretend that he's an Aussie. But it's not like he's driving in the Supercars New Zealand series. So we will claim his talent for this pod.
I'm right with
I
that.
think. I mean, I don't know, but I know you weren't as interested in it as me. But in terms of what happened in the streets of Chicago a couple of weeks ago when he got his maiden NASCAR win on his debut.
Hmm.
I think a lot of fans, Australia and in the States as well, were interested in what he could do when the tables were probably a little bit more even in terms of the strength of the NASCAR grid and going to a place where the other teams knew and where he was sort of a fish out is it fish out of water? Is that the right
Hmm.
saying?
Yeah.
Um, and we got some answers to those questions this weekend, I think. So for those of you who don't know, SVG did two NASCAR races this week, one in the truck on a small oval, and then one at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course. Two very different tracks, two very different vehicles, um, and two probably very different results as well, I would say. And in the Cup car race this morning, he was also joined by fellow Supercars alum Brody Casteki, which who qualified probably just as surprisingly well, and then was hampered by a practice crash, which made him have to start from the rear of the grid. SVG finished 10th and was running 8th, 9th, 10th, pretty much the whole race. And Brody started last, so probably like 38th, and raced up to about 14th before sort of throwing caution to the wind with a bit of an aggressive strategy, and then ended up finishing 22nd. So off the rip, I think a lot of people might be a little bit underwhelmed without sort of having watched the race of the results that were displayed this weekend. But I think with a little bit of digging and just a bit of context, the results I think speak really well for what our drivers did. And I
Yeah,
think
but
one
like
thing that
I think SVG's initial performance was like exceeded expectations like by
it
a lot.
exceeded it
And we
exceeded
can't expect him to
expectation.
do that every week.
No, I think well, the expectations that were reset after that result were probably
Hmm.
unrealistic. Having said that, like going forward, this is over the last, what is it, 2 3 weeks now, there has definitely been a shift in the story, as in he is now very much looking to pursue this um as of the beginning of next year. So also then the goalposts for what success is measured or how success is measured is definitely going to change.
Yeah.
And I think sort of this race sort of was a bit more of a in-depth look of what he's going to have to contend with, and also how what success is going to look like for him, and also the steep learning curve he's going to have to sort of fast track in order to, if he wants to be a main game racer in the
Hmm.
NASCAR Cup. It's going to be probably a bit of a steeper learning curve than what a lot of people might be thinking after his initial first race. Um, so off face value, qualified eighth. It's a pretty decent job at a
Hmm.
track that he's never been to, had 20 minutes practice at, and then also all the other drivers and teams have been there before. So in terms of where he qualified, I thought was pretty on the money. I wasn't
Pretty amazing when you think
disappointed.
about it. He's never been there before.
No, not and he's driving a car that he's or driven for one weekend, but on a
Mm.
track that is so far different from the track that he had raced at. Um, and he's still very well known to the other teams that had were racing there, and also I won't mention this over and over again, but another important point is he's racing for a small team. They're a team that is punching above their weight and doing a great job at it. They've got another driver who is in contention to make the NASCAR playoffs, but by no means are they a Hendricks Motorsport or Penske Motorsport kind of juggernaut team or Joe Gibbs Racing. This is a team that um, is battling hard to make it into the playoffs.
Can you just explain? Because, for me, I'm a novice when it comes to this stuff. What are the NASCAR playoffs?
So the NASCAR playoffs, if they haven't changed, which I don't believe they have, is there's about it's about 30 something races in the NASCAR season.
Yeah.
And the last 10 so over the say let's say there's 38 over the first 30 races, the top 16 drivers in the championship up to that stage qualify for the playoffs.
Right.
But if you win a race, you automatically qualify for the playoffs. So then how many different people win races um, pushes down the people who are getting in by consistency and points, which is a big point that we're going to come up to, and what we're going to discuss with where sort of Shane Van Gisbergen's future in the sport can be important for a smaller or mid-sized teams.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I think, one caveat that is really important when you're thinking about the results from this weekend as well with Brody and Shane. Like there's a mentality that them guys have to have. They're coming into a sport that is 2 races now removed from drivers entering the playoffs, and you heard it over and over again in all of the interviews. I was saying, we're here to have a good time, show what we can do, but by no means are we trying to cause cause jeopardy to drivers who have been working this whole season, trying to make this playoff. We don't want to wreck anybody. We don't want to compromise
Mm-hmm.
anybody's races. That also was a thing on the Friday night race that he did in the truck. That he was also the first race for their playoff, so he wasn't trying to jeopardize anyone in that as well. So the mindset when you're sort of wrestling with that idea can't be, I suppose, as aggressive as you probably would in normal circumstances. Does that explain the playoffs to you? A bit of a
Yep.
understanding?
Yep.
And then
Yep.
in the playoffs, there's 10 races. After the first 3 races, you cut your grid from 16 to 12, the next 3 from 12 to 8, the next 3, 8 to 4, and then there's a 1 race shootout for the top 4 cars, with the
Mm-hmm.
whole grid being involved. But the top, whoever is the highest ranked car in the top 4, usually will win the championship, and usually that car ends up winning the race as well.
Okay.
So that's sort of how the NASCAR playoffs works for anyone who is not sure what we're talking about. Brody Casteki, before we keep going about SVG, I thought had the better of the 2 races. Considering the circumstances, I think he had a little bit more pace and was able to race through the cars a little bit easier than SVG was, albeit he was starting from the back, and you would expect the better drivers to be at the part of the track where SVG was racing as well. So take that how you will. But it was a very interesting race. There was 1 caution on the second lap, I think it was. So it was about 80 or 79 laps of clean running, which is something that does not happen very often in NASCAR racing.
Right.
So
Okay.
sort of the way teams were playing strategies, like you would think most of them would have expected a caution to come sometime, and then it ended up getting to a point when nothing, where sort of nothing happened, and the front battles were not as interesting as I think they could have been, because there was never a moment for the cars to sort of be bunched back up again. And having said that, a small team won the race. Second time race winner Michael McDowell won the race, which is we'll get to that pretty soon as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was not probably the best race for our drivers to sort of show what they can do when the grid gets bunched, because it was never bunched after the initial start. But I think one thing that has become very apparent over the last couple of weeks, with Shane sort of making it known that he's going to NASCAR, and also making it known that he doesn't think he's going to do a full season, is to buy a charter, which is a license to race for a full season, costs about $20 million.
Oh,
And then to fund a car for a whole season costs about $31 million. So we're looking at a big chunk of money it will cost
huge.
a team that doesn't have a charter to run for a full season, especially like, which say the situation he's in now with Trackhouse Racing. They're running that one. They've got one car that's chartered, and then they're running a one-off at selected races. So the amount of investment that would need to be ramped up for him to get on the grid full time next year, we're looking at about $50 million. That's a massive
Oh,
investment for any team, any sponsor.
any
For
sport.
Yeah, especially like, without saying it the most polite way possible, for a rookie
Hmm.
who we know is definitely going to struggle at certain types of racetracks in his first season. That's a massive sort of bill to cop. Which sort of makes me think that we're not going to see him on a full season sort of pursuit next year. I think we're going to see him at selected races, the races that the team thinks will perform the best at for
Perform.
them.
Yeah.
And then I think we'll see him in a few of the truck races and a few of the Xfinity sort of like F2 championship of NASCAR, like the second and third tiers, probably
Mm-hmm.
learning how to run in the pack, run different oval configurations, and just get comfortable running in those oval configurations. That's something that, like, take it how you will, he's never done before. You
No.
running four wide in an oval is something that would be very foreign to anyone and he has got no dirt sprint experience. So it's something that he's going to have to, or at least take a year to get comfortable with. But I think the team he's done these two races for, and the team he's going to do some select races for next year, Trackhouse Racing, seems to be a sort of a match made in heaven for him. It's a sort of newer team.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to afford him the time to sort of learn. They're not, the expectations for them aren't going and chasing championships. And Shane is going to need time to learn. And the thing that I think he can offer them is, hey, when we get to a select 7 or 8, I think there's 8 sort of circuit races on the calendar of the 38. When we get to these races, I'll be sort of at my best. And if everything shakes out well, we might have a sniff at maybe winning one of these, 2 of these every year, or being in the hunt. And I
Do
think
you, do
really
you
that's what he can offer.
do you think he's I do, but do you think he's more of a sure thing than a rookie coming up from the feeder series?
Sure thing in what way?
Like that he'll perform and get wins eventually, more so than someone coming up through their own kind of feeder
I
series that
think
they have
it
for
I
NASCAR?
think it I think it all depends on A, what team he's with, and then B, how quickly he adapts to the oval racing.
Mm,
Because regardless, like, someone who's driven ovals from
yeah.
14 now to 24, he's going to feel a lot more comfortable on 30 of the 30, 30 of the 38 races of a season.
Yeah.
Um, So in terms of upside over a young driver, that's um, probably not in the long run. But at the same time, for 8 of those races, they might feel like they have a much better chance of snagging a win.
Yep.
And a lot of the time, a rookie driver doesn't really snag a win anyway. They're very, very sort of there are exceptions, obviously, and obviously there are talents, but it's
Mm.
not a common thing. And especially, I think for the team that he's going to be racing with, um, he's bringing. Well, I think the whole I listened to the Dale Earnhardt podcast pretty consistently, and when I learned that he was coming on the podcast, I thought, wow, that's a interesting, not interesting. I was just surprised that he was being invited on after one win. Um, and I think Dale is probably one of the better minds in NASCAR at the moment. He thinks very open mindedly. And he was saying a few interesting things on the podcast with Shane, but also the podcast before him, sort of saying he laid out sort of the financial structure of what it costs to go racing, and the amount of money that a team is going to have to bring to the table, being a team owner
Mm.
as well. And I think that sort of made it very clear that it's not like going supercars racing, which is sort of our backyard, and it's just so much. There is so much more money involved, and
Oh,
you need such a
massively.
bigger return on investment for your sponsors. It's going to be an interesting year for him, and I think that's why he's going to have to sort of grow slowly. And well, he can't grow slowly, but he has to start slowly, but pick events that his team think, well, you do this, you'll learn certain skills, and maybe in a year
Yep.
or 2 years, you have enough skills to go for a full charted season. um but yeah, I think that team is going to control the expectations and um control the learning curve for Shane, because what this race showed us is, yeah, he wasn't at the pointy end, but bring him to an oval with no practice, a road course with no practice, and he was consistently in the top third of the grid for the whole race.
Yep.
Sorry about that. So, I think um, there is definitely good reason for him to be there, and with the right coaching and the right app, and he's a freak. He's a freak driver. Um, I don't not think he's gonna learn the skills it's gonna take to go around the oval. And realistically, I think we had Marcus Ambrose go a few years, a couple decades ago now. But I believe that the skill that SVG shows is the sort of the talent that SVG has is even higher than what Ambrose had, and also the car that Shane's going to be driving is closer to what he's driven before. So I think there's a bit on both ends that are going to help him out in the long run.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I think realistically, what we saw this weekend was a validation that he's there, and he's not going to be out of his comfort zone pursuing this next year. And I
I
think
think if
more
there's
so than
yeah, I think if there's one guy that I would put money on picking something up quickly and excelling in, it would be SVG.
I think also what's been really cool is that, well, can't speak about all Australian fans, but I think there's been a real crossover of people wanting to know more about supercars from the States, like where does this guy come from? And also people in Australia sort of wanting to see a bit more where he's going and sort of being more interested in the NASCAR side of it, which might be probably a more interesting thing in coming years if sort of things shake out how they might. I think
I
you got some
was
ideas about that.
I was thinking about this the other day about how much SVG is getting on the news because of what he's doing over there. How much, there's articles on like websites they got that have nothing to do with motorsport. They're just, news websites or whatever. And I'm thinking we currently have the IndyCar champion racing in America, and we hear nothing. Like we hear about Daniel and Oscar, different story, Formula One, but we hear nothing about Will Power. We actually hear more about Scotty Mack, again, another New Zealander. Why don't we get that kind of coverage for our own racer?
I think the difference is that Will Power left very early
Mm,
in his career and never made a name here. Um, like really,
mm.
uh,
I know what you mean. Yeah,
for people to be interested in him when he went there. Sort of very similar to even Scott Dixon is a Kiwi. He's a
yeah.
multiple IndyCar champion as well, and I think that they laud him more than we laud Will Power. But
Mm,
I think it's still very similar, like that. Just that they left so young that if you don't
yeah.
know, like, and thing as well, IndyCar is such a is it's big, but it's not massive. Like even compared to NASCAR, like NASCAR dwarfs IndyCar so much in terms of popularity and
You
fan
reckon here?
numbers. Oh no, not here. I'm talking about in the States. Like
Oh yeah.
what it does here is a drop in the ocean compared to the
Mm,
hundreds of millions of people in the States. Um, but it's sort of like big fish in small ponds, whereas NASCAR is
yeah, yeah.
a big pond. Um, and he's put the time in here for people to actually sort of have been invested in him, be fans of him for years and years, see his talent and sort of story grow. And then now, he's he he bookmarked him leaving very well as well by going and winning a debut race, which is
Mm,
has never been done before. So sort of the stars have all aligned. And I think the thing that the biggest thing he's going to struggle with, I believe, is that he's gone and he set such a high benchmark that people like the good racers there are going to take it personally, are going to want to really put him in his place,
mm-hmm.
and sort of stamp their authority. So it's going to be interesting 2024 for Shane. I think I'm interested to see exactly how extensive his his season is going to be, and also like what steps his team puts in place to give him the ability to learn and also showcase his skill with the car. Um, but like I don't think it's bad for anyone involved that you've got someone coming in who's bringing you an audience from say Australia, New Zealand, and then also supercars are getting a little bit more, you know, talk time from the States as well, which is
Mm.
it can't be a bad thing for the sport, that's for sure. Especially now with the whole Mustang Camaro championship that we've got going on. Like if it was ever going to be relevant to people in the States, it's more so ever now.
Do you think our popularity would grow over there? Like I just don't. I don't see that happening.
I don't think it. I don't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't prioritize trying to grow our popularity there
Mm,
more so than trying to just build the best product possible. And if that was then a byproduct was it growing overseas? And also if we got it into a happy place where the parity was all fixed, and then having maybe another demo race at Coda or something on a weekend with NASCAR. I
mm,
can't see how that would be a bad thing. I think it would be I actually think that would be a great thing. Um, for like two countries that actually have still got a passion for the V8 engine,
mm,
very sort of muscle car, followings, to sort of have a weekend where you're sort of showing the two, you know, true championships left that have that in their DNA. Like that couldn't be a bad thing. But
I
I
have
wouldn't prioritize that, I suppose.
I have seen like scrolling through social media, um, more like podcasts talking about supercars over there, like usual NASCAR podcasts discussing supercars because of SVG going over there. So,
I think we're super critical of supercars because it's in our backyard. And
mm,
I'd say probably the same way that NASCAR fans have been super critical of NASCAR till very recently. Um, Whereas when you're not as invested and you're just watching stuff happen that seems interesting, you think it's the best thing since sliced bread.
mm.
Um, and I think realistically, like if someone who didn't know what supercars was watching, some of the racing we've had this year, they probably would think it was the best thing since sliced bread if they, didn't know the background stories and stuff like that. So I would, of all the ideas that have been floated in terms of where we take this Supercars championship to try and grow its appeal and what crossover events can we do, that would be the most appealing to me. And I think the one that would make the most sense for taking it to fans that have that, that identity in their DNA. And also taking it to one of the biggest motorsport markets in the world. Like, let's not pretend like Formula One is a easy first, but in terms of domestic championships, just from the sheer size of the country, NASCAR would have to be a clear second.
All the southern states bloody love it. So,
well,
huge numbers. Don't they get more than the Super Bowl at some NASCAR events?
At Daytona,
yeah,
they get 100. I think they can fit 100,000 plus in that stadium.
Yeah, like it's
probably more. It's a big bowl of of V8 craziness. So yeah, I think this week, what this weekend has sort of solidified is he's got the capability to go to some races and have the skill. It's a steep learning curve as well. It's not going to be walking in there and schooling everyone every day on those certain tracks, but I think it's the kind of challenge that he's sort of hungry for after doing everything possible here.
Probably needs it, to be honest, because he's been dabbling in rally. He's been dabbling in a lot of things. So
yeah, 100%.
Probably been coming for a while.
Yeah, and then I think we'll just finish on the fact that, okay, why do we think he's definitely going? We know that. It's just a formality now. And we have the interesting news that Will Brown has been released from his 2024 year of his Erebus contract. It has not been confirmed that he will be driving for Triple Eight next year, but I don't see any other drivers being released off their contracts for next year at the same time. So putting 2 and 2 together, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that he will be joining Triple Eight next year and partnering Brock Feeney. And I think that is a very safe but also calculated bet by Triple Eight Racing. Of the young guys, I think that are in the grid that they don't have, I would have said it that the two drivers would have been Will himself or his teammate, Brody.
Well, do you think it's a good move? Because Erebus have a really good car this year. Do you see Triple Eight progressing further over the next couple of years, and that's why he's made the jump? Or
yep, there's just money involved. Like, there's just so much money that more money that they can invest in when the understanding of the basics becomes uniform. There's one thing that always seems to push on more than everyone else, and that's AAA racing, because they put the best people in the best situations. And that's not a knock against Erebus, but I just think, well,
resource wise,
yeah, they've just got the resources, they've got the know-how, and they've been doing it at the top for so long. Why would you bet against it? The one thing I do think, though, is that it gives everybody other than AAA a better chance of snagging a drivers' championship. Because where I think SVG and Scotty Mack were probably two of the, probably cream of the like ahead above the rest in terms of the grid. What I think now is the grid, by virtue of them two being removed, becomes more competitive. And off that, I think you're going to see drivers like Chaz and Cam, be much more involved in a championship fight with drivers that I think are not as far above them in terms of, I don't think that SVG is much further above Cam and Chaz, but
he's always got a better car.
He's always had a better car, and then the skill involved as well, where I haven't seen that that step, and Will Brown's got time to sort of take that step, but as of yet, I think is a really good driver. But I wouldn't say he's going to go down as one of the all-time greats. Whereas SVG always looked like he just had, another level to go to when he
Mm.
needed to.
Who do you think takes the leadership role at Triple Eight? Brock or Will?
I think that's going to be an interesting dilemma that the team is going to have, and I think for the first year, I don't think either will. To be honest, I think it's going to be very much a team led by Jamie Whincup, and Dutton, and I think it's just going to be whoever has a better initial season if they can keep that momentum. Like I wouldn't say that when Whincup and Lowndes were there, there was a distinct 1-2 driver, and then also when Whincup and SVG were there, I don't think there was a distinct 1-2 driver. But there was definitely, like, without words being spoken, the optics that, yeah, by the time Whincup and Lowndes had run their course for the last couple of years, it was definitely Whincup. And then even in the first couple of years of Whincup and SVG, it was still Whincup. And then we saw that transition to SVG. So I just think it's going to be really whatever driver can seize the moment. And we might even see like a dynamic like what we saw with Lowndes and Whincup, where Whincup would win the championships, but Lowndes would win Bathurst, which is, probably the best of both worlds for a team, really.
Brock's doing quite well this year, so I don't
I
imagine he'll
just,
want to.
I just think he's still a bit young, like to sort of take that
Yeah,
leadership role in a team. He is still like very young.
yeah,
I,
been
I,
done
I
before
don't,
though, I guess.
but has it been done that
He's been in the
young?
team now for 2 years, so it'll be his third year. But like, I guess
Yeah,
experience
say
wise,
say say Will Brown wins the championship this year and comes in as their Supercars champion.
oh well, that's a different story. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is a very possible thing that can happen.
Mm.
And I think being somewhere for 2 years isn't going to supersede someone who's coming in as a champion.
I'm just
I think it's
look,
just going to be
I'm ex
I think it's going to be a very sort of interesting juggling act that Triple Eight is going to have to do for the first part of that year, because they're both going to want to one up each other, and we've seen that happen before and not end well in a few memorable situations.
I'm excited, not for SVG to go, but for maybe Ford to get their act together a little bit more, and then we see more of a title fight between the top echelon drivers rather than this year's a bit of an anomaly where SVG hasn't run away with it. But I think next year, like you said, if Triple A get their act together, they would have run away with it. But without SVG in the seat, I don't know if they do as much.
Well,
So
Ford have looked bad without SVG looking formidable,
hmm.
which I think that says more about Ford than SVG. Like, I think as well, if people are going to take solace from the fact that Ford are going to be better because SVG is not in a Camaro, I mean, they're already losing that war. But
I
yeah,
just want to see
I
Chaz
am,
win a championship, mate. That's all I want.
you and me both. I'm excited for seeing. I always loved the idea of when one of our, well, I say that one of our, but he's a
Hmm.
New Zealander. Someone from our paddock goes abroad, and I like seeing them, do well, but also seeing how they stack up against some of the best in the world. We've seen it with, Danny Rick, now Scott McLaughlin in IndyCar. Got a few
Oscar,
of our GT drivers. We've got Oscar, and now SVG sort of throwing his hat in the ring as well. It
Jack
just
Doohan.
makes it Jack doing it just makes it more interesting to watch other motorsport, because you have
100%.
an investment, you have a natural investment in it, and I love that.
Yeah, 100%. Like I find myself watching
I have
F2
a I have a reason
when,
to watch NASCAR next year.
yeah, like I have a reason. Like I've always watched F2, but I'm much more invested in it when we have someone like a Jack or an Oscar or whoever's racing in F2. Like
Yeah.
you got someone to barrack for. So yeah, mate, I think we punch well above our weight considering the size of our country and how far away we are from Europe.
Also, he's a New Zealander, so let's not pretend he isn't.
All right. This part of the world then. This part of the world.
Yeah, I think the population of Australia and New Zealand punch well above their weight. And there's a few
Yeah.
comments on that on the last video we did on YouTube, and I thought that was interesting of people bringing up, stuff that you just forget about, the fact that McLaren was from New
New
Zealand and
Zealand.
things like that. It's just, we do good. We do well. We do
Yeah,
well.
like look back through history. Dan Gurney, he was a New Zealander, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I
F
think someone brought up
F1,
again. Yeah.
Brabham, we've had Alan Jones. We've done all right.
Well, even when all is said and done, I think all the records in IndyCar history are probably gonna be a lot of them are gonna be owned by Australian and New Zealander between Will Power and Scott Dixon.
I think so. That's
I
pretty
think
cool.
I think Will Power's got the pole record already, and I think Scott
Yep.
Dixon now has got the most consecutive races in a row, the most race
Hmm.
wins, most championships. So
It's pretty cool.
taking the world on.
100%.
Yeah. I
100%.
think we'll leave it there.
Well, we did try and find some things to discuss because of the whole break in our main motorsport. So Formula One's not back until the 25th of August, I think. So we got one more weekend.
Supercars is back next week.
Supercars back next week. Lovely. And you know what else is back? Premier League. So good. So thanks for listening, guys.
I was not expecting that at all.
When this gets released, hopefully Man United get their first win of the season and smooth sailing moving forward. But Joe, thanks for joining me, mate.
Thanks for coming on.
Keep liking, subscribing, watching those YouTube videos, commenting, all that sort of stuff. It's been awesome on YouTube lately. So keep it up.